Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're all very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar. I hope you're all keeping well and looking forward to another very interesting presentation this week. Keeping our traditional farm heritage alive helps protect Ireland's history and nature. It also teaches future generations how farming shaped our way of life. And we're delighted to be joined this morning by Barry O'Reilly, Department of Heritage, and Tom Fallon, Teagasc Farm Buildings and Infrastructure Specialist. We're also joined by Dr. Keena, who is Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist, to help us out with questions. Good morning, Catherine.
How are you, Cathal?
Good. How are you keeping?
Good.
Catherine, just to start with you today, maybe what's this week all about for us?
I suppose this is Teagasc's contribution to Heritage Week. Heritage Week is run by the Heritage Council, and it focuses on natural, built and cultural heritage. Now, Cathal, as you know, we feature natural heritage a lot on Signpost with the biodiversity angles. So I make an effort every year to kind of just focus on, it gives a chance to focus on the built heritage. So that's where we're delighted to have Barry, and myself and Tom are working with Barry on promoting a built heritage on farmland built heritage.
Yeah. And Barry, you have a really interesting presentations lined up for us today. Maybe you'll give us a quick summary of what you do yourself.
Yeah, I work as an architectural conservation advisor with the National Built Heritage Service, which is part of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, or just shorten it to Department of Heritage, I suppose. And my particular brief in the department is matters relating to vernacular architecture. In other words, the everyday architecture, particularly of rural Ireland, farms and so on. So that's my special interest, and has been for the last 30 years.
Yeah, lots of experience then to share with us today.
Hopefully.
And Tom, people will know you. You've been a lot of farmyards around the country, and I suppose we generally call on you for new builds and redesigns, but tell us a little bit what you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about agricultural buildings in the landscape, because both old and new, because they do form, in the farmyards can be quite visible in that, so we need to be cognizant of how they look. So that's what I'm going to look at today, really.
Yeah, super. That's good to go, Barry. So if you want to take off.
So what we have here in this opening slide then is a fairly typical farmyard, a nice one, not too far away from where I'm living in South Tip. And it's got all the usual things: the farmhouse, outbuildings arranged in maybe a little courtyard sort of arrangement, nice forged blacksmith gate at the front with stout piers, roadside wall, and then, of course, the ubiquitous hay barn there in the background. A hay barn is probably the most iconic farm building, if not building, in Ireland, in the Irish landscape. The mix of materials there between rendered stone, the metal, slate roofs, corrugated, the whole thing is what we have in rural Ireland. It's the stuff of rural Ireland. Yeah. So these are some of the things that I reckon are really important about farm heritage, rural heritage in general. That it is our built vernacular, essentially. It was born in tradition. So the template, if you like, for vernacular buildings, old gates and all the rest of it, didn't come out of pattern books or off architects' drawing boards. It's come from people's own traditions and their own, if you like, templates that are within their head. And this idea goes back thousands of years, really. So it's truly ancient in Ireland. The sense of place engendered by the vernacular, and we'll see a lot of this now shortly, is really, really important. Very, very important. Craft, very evident in that opening slide. The connections with our forebears and with other cultures is very evident. Mud is found throughout the world. It's found in Ireland as a building material. Our ancient ancestors are really were the progenitors of everything that we see in the Irish landscape. So there is continuity that goes right the way through. So in terms of the scale then of the vernacular, it's everything from an interior of a dwelling house right the way through farmyards and into hamlets, which is essentially groups of farmyards. They're actually very common in Ireland, in some places more than others. Just hit that again, Catherine. Yeah, so whole landscapes, like for example, the Iron Islands is like almost the classic vernacular landscape. Stone walls, irregular fields, little roads, green roads, vernacular buildings, even the concrete water collectors that they have on the islands. All of that is vernacular landscape. And it is of not just local interest, it's absolutely of national and international interest and significance. Right, so farmyards then obviously are a key part of the whole business. Is it, Catherine? So these are a number of different farmyards that you'll find in different parts of the country. One on the top right there is a photograph taken in Kilkenny. It's a sort of farmyard that you find quite widely. Sorry, the top two quite widely in the east. The bottom ones there are farmyards you'd find in the west. The bottom left there is from Kerry, where you have buildings in parallel, and with a yard or street, as it's often called, between them. And the bottom right then is Donegal with the rounded thatched roofs. And the farm buildings tend to be added to the dwelling house in a line, sometimes quite a long line. Right. Okay. So these are a couple of those appear there again. And they draw. We just look at the bottom right drawing there, which is from a beautiful book by Paddy and Maura Shaffrey called Ireland's Buildings of the Irish Countryside. Sorry, Ireland's Irish Countryside Buildings from 1985. It's a super book, and is really a Bible for me. Anyway, it is the Irish landscape. So it shows from in an aerial view a number of features: a courtyard arrangement, gate leading into it, and then of course the ubiquitous hay barn. In this case, it's a 4-bay. The most typical would be a 3-bay hay barn, and then in some parts of the west you might only get 1 or 2. So this is just a sample of farm buildings from different parts of the country. The one in the middle right there is actually from the Great Blasket Island, and it's a building for a shelter for turf. There would have been a bit of a rough roof over it. There are holes in the sides of it, and the air then blew. The wind blew air then through the turf to dry it. So just a range of farm buildings there. Not all hay barns are made of, were the work of contractors and such with the steel stanchions. Sometimes you get timber poles and sometimes you get pitched roofs. So the typical farm building in Ireland is very small, very low, very simple. And on the face of it, you mightn't necessarily be able to tell exactly what the function was. Some of them are piggeries, some of them are stables, some cow sheds, others would be stores for, say, seed potatoes and so on. In the northwest, you will get buildings like the one at the middle top here, which has steps going up to our first floor. But it's very much a northwestern feature. So you do get some distinction around the country. So our vernacular houses then come in 2 types generally, lobby entry and direct entry. So lobby entry, you come in, you hit a little wall with spy window, as it's called, which protects the fireplace from drafts from the door. The typical tradition in so many parts of rural Ireland, even occasionally today, is to keep the door open and let the light in as well as the draft. Hit it further there, Catherine. Yeah. So this is the little wall that you'd see as you go in, and they're very common. These buildings are very common in the eastern half of the country. So that's lobby entry or heart lobby. And then this is typically what you get in the west. This is an illustration from Donegal, and you go straight into the kitchen of the house, which is the central and main room of the building, multifunctional building room, and the fireplace is off to one side, one end, rather than directly in front of you. So that's called direct entry because you just walk straight in. Now there are no really, if you like, colloquial names for these plan forms. Curiously, hit it again, and in parts of the northwest, you'll get this bed space to one side of the fireplace, and that would register externally as a little projection. So it's a very homely sort of feature, and it would have housed maybe an elderly parent. So the domestic interior, 4 of these photographs are from one house in County Offaly, and it shows the interior of a pretty intact vernacular house with furniture, the settle bed. Lots of people would be familiar with that. The huge hearth dominating the building, the kitchen, and indeed the building, and a fire kept going really fairly constantly. The pictures, the picture on the right then is a partition between the kitchen and the room beyond. On the bottom there, you can see two pictures which exemplify so much of Catholic Ireland, with the Sacred Heart lamp, statues, Our Lady Blue, and so on. So this is a particularly intact house, which is lovingly maintained by the family. Bottom right then picture was a straw-lined ceiling to a house in County Waterford. So all this stuff is, on the face of it, inverted commas, primitive, but it is absolutely, highly significant in not just Irish terms, but international terms. So all of this is really the stuff of the vernacular house going back, and in some cases still remains the case. So you get distinctive materials to keep on in vernacular house. These are so you've got mud, you've got branches of trees, very rough, straw, you've got scraw from the bog or top of a grassy field. You have peat in some places was used to form walls. Wicker, in this case, the bottom right, it's a canopy over a fireplace. You'd imagine that would catch fire. No, because the fireplaces were so big and because people were burning turf, which burns at a low temperature, not coal and not anything stronger. What's happened with some attached houses recently is people have installed solid fuel stoves. These generate huge temperatures, and unfortunately, fires conflagrations have resulted from these apparatus. The same is true of Britain. So the advice from our department is please don't install solid fuel stoves in thatched houses. They're highly dangerous. So different types of mud, you get it in lumps, maybe the size of your fist. You get it in bricks, you might say. You get it as more like blocks. You also get it as plastering around wicker partitions, such as bottom right-hand corner here. And the top right corner there, you have a fireplace canopy in a house in County Wexford, which is all made from mud brick, adobe, if you like. So stone, obviously, is very evident throughout the country. Some of it very rough, some of it much finer. So obviously, thatch is a very important part of the vernacular scene. It's also very important, if you like, byproduct of the cereal harvest. So oats, barley, wheat, rye, all used in the thatching of houses. Also reed. So you've got the trashing of the straw there, top right from County Offaly. In the bottom right there, you have reed being harvested from various of the rivers, the Shannon, but also some of the major rivers in the southeast. And so this is an example of how the vernacular is tied intimately into farm life, farm economy. So different thatching styles. This is on the left, scalloped thatch, which is very widespread around the country, involving scallops made from willow or hazel, which are bent into a sort of hairpin and used to secure the thatch. On the right there, you have bundles of straw which are knotted and they're shoved into an underlying thatch by a gadget called a spurtle, a slice, all sorts of names. The thatcher there on the bottom right has one such gadget. He's got little prongs which grip the knot in the bundle and push it into the roof. So trussed is the word for that, truss thatch. Okay. And then you have roped thatch in the west of Ireland, particularly along the Atlantic coasts, Galway, parts of Mayo, Donegal. On the right then you have modern reed thatch using drills and wires and all sorts of things. This isn't heritage work and we don't push it, but it is part of the thatching enterprise, the economy and the life of the working life of thatchers. So there are other roofing materials. Stone flags, for example, in North Clare. Corrugated, as I mentioned a couple of times, was used either on its own or else to cover over thatch at a stage when people were finding thatch was so hard to maintain, it was getting expensive, thatchers were getting fewer, the good quality materials not so plentiful. There's a big push now to try and ameliorate the situation for thatched buildings and their owners. And then the right there, bottom right, slate, which is like probably the most common roofing material on vernacular buildings. And top right is tarred canvas, and this is a shot from the Great Blasket. It was introduced initially by the Statistics Board to provide a new material for boats, and then it was translated into the houses by the people themselves. Okay. We have obviously different types of landscapes: upland, lowland, coastal, lowland, top left there with a dense farm settlement. On the right, then a typical Western farm setting. The bottom right, Tory Island, with a settlement, and then the fields radiating out from it. Seaweed would obviously form part of that economy as well, helping to improve the land quality. Bottom left then is cuts for cots along the shore in County Kilkenny, and so people weren't always just farmers, as if that wasn't enough, but they could also be fishermen as well, or even have some other occupation. So there is a degree of mixing of economy in different parts of the country. So change obviously is a big thing in the Irish landscape. You had booley huts at one stage where people would, in case of summer pasture, have temporary dwellings. Throughout the country, we had the whole idea of Rundale, where people had intermixed plots of ground, very hard to maintain, I suppose, and manage. And landlords treated them as being an affront to to the dignity of to their dignity, you might say, as well as being just very uneconomic. So often they, and later on the Land Commission and indeed CDB, rationalised all of these small holdings, which have their roots really in the medieval period, rationalised them into larger blocks. And that's a process which has happened throughout the world at different times. And then this is a typical scene in the West where the old settlements are broken up, new houses built, strung out along a road, and then fields provided for people running out front and back from the houses. So obviously fieldscapes, different types of field boundaries around the country, stone, earthen banks with hedges and so on them. Other people in Teagasc will be extremely familiar with all of this, and this is the stuff of so much work that's being done. So very irregular fields, often very small in the west, more substantial fields in east, something which is probably a legacy from the medieval period, but with pockets here and there of a more Western style of landscape organisation. So field boundaries, and you get field boundaries, obviously, I mentioned that, different types. You get rough stone ones, you get in the likes of West Wicklow, posts made of stone with panels of stone within them. And then obviously hedgerows and hedges on banks, and even hedges connected, in conjunction with walls, is very, very common. So all of this is the stuff of our traditional farm landscape, and very significant, makes Ireland very distinctive compared to quite a few other countries. Okay. So gates are of immense interest. Some people are into stamp collecting and spotting locomotives and so on, but you could have a very happy time of your life just looking at gates, looking at the quality of the craftsmanship, the little details, distinctive gate piers and so on, the work of the mason, and most particularly of the blacksmith. So this is just a few photographs of a single gate and the style associated with it. You often get styles associated with gates, S-T-I-L-E-S. So there's just one gate, and you can see the beauty of this gate. Maintaining it is really important and is of benefit to everybody, not just the landowner. So styles come in different styles. So you get stone steps, within walls, attached to walls. You get more irregular openings, and all of these are of interest and value in the landscape, often overlooked, passed by, not given a second glance. But once you get your eye in, you start to see them everywhere, and you really appreciate the beauty and utility of these features. Water is obviously critically important to everybody. We know it ourselves from the current situation in the Middle East, the difficulties that people have with staying alive. Water is life. pumps, wells of various sorts, litter the Irish countryside in the best possible way. And again, these are features of immense interest and importance. They can be within farmyards or they can be at roadsides. So other farm features are stands for churns, the sequence there on the right, water collectors, troughs, querns of various sorts are often proudly on display in farmyards. Farm machinery, really interesting part of the whole farm heritage. In the bottom left there is a scarecrow. I love photographing scarecrows. They can be made from the most bizarre materials, but they're really interesting. So I've already mentioned farm villages, farm hamlets. They are different in different parts of the country. There is an immense variety of these settlements. That picture on top left is from Whitestown in County Louth. And on the bottom right is an example of, the two photographs on the right is an example of the loss of a settlement. So this is a settlement in County Galway, which was completely removed, and you can only see traces of it in an aerial photograph there on the bottom right. And Smerrick on the bottom left from County Kerry is a settlement made of with a parallel arrangement of ranges of buildings, outbuildings and farmhouses. So just a little example, Bullyglass in County Kilkenny, which has a series of long winding fields, as you can see on the right-hand side of both the aerial photograph and of the map. And these fields are probably late medieval in date. You're talking maybe 16th, maybe 15th, 16th century in date. The large triangular area in the middle of the whole picture there, the whole map, is a green, which was carved out probably in the 18th century when there was a change from tillage to dairying in this area. It's a really interesting spot, Bullyglass in County Kilkenny. So again, like with hedges and other field boundaries, roads, lanes, little bridges, clappers and so on going across streams, paths, and so on are really very interesting. Again, like when you get your eye into them, you see them and you say, they're designed for people to pass rather than necessarily carts or horses or anything like that, or cattle. So you'll get roads which are designed for vehicular traffic, others designed really with animals in mind, and then others designed with people in mind to connect up bits of the countryside and particularly bits of these farm hamlets. Then aspects which are more communal, I suppose, in nature. The top left there, you've got a tree which is just left to be a feature within the landscape. These often have names associated with them, like the rag tree or the mild bush. I think this one here on the top left is the mild bush. Lime kilns, such as the top middle, are very prone to being destroyed. We lost one in our own district there a few years ago. Bottom left, a sweat house, which is a feature of the North Midlands, South Ulster. The trashing day, this is one in County Tip. And these, my own mother-in-law very fondly remembers trashing days. It's just part of the fabric of the social fabric of rural Ireland. Kids playing, bottom right there, in cities and towns. People dancing on piers, and so on, other places. Again, part of our cultural heritage. And then some good reads. This is a selection of books which are of value. On the left, there are books which are general, which are informative about the vernacular heritage, our farm heritage. And then on the right, these are some books which are associated with conservation and fixing up buildings and so on. That's the last of the slides, Catherine. So basically, the key thing from the department's point of view is to retain farm heritage as part of the national cultural heritage. Be kind to it. Only do what's necessary. with farm buildings and farmhouses and gates and so on. Look after them, be careful with them. And as part of the government's campaign, we launched this document, A Living Tradition, back in 21. And it's basically a strategy for encouraging all to look after and consider the proper conservation of all aspects of our rural and particularly farming heritage. So this is something which we've been gradually working our way through over the last few years. Okay, I leave it there, lads. Okay, that's it, Cathal.
That was super, Barry. Thanks a million. Very interesting, and resonated a lot with me. I'm coming from a farm where we have a lot of traditional buildings, so I had a lot of questions for you. But maybe Tom, if you want to start sharing your presentation, and we'll wait for a lot of our questions at the end. But just a quick one for you, Barry, when Tom is going to share his presentation. Mm-hmm. I noticed you mentioned traditional farm hay sheds. What is the traditional color for those hay sheds?
Red.
Red, is it?
Oxide red.
Yeah.
As part of our work, we are producing a handbook for the conservation, repair, and maintenance of vernacular buildings. There will be a section in that on corrugated iron, and indeed corrugated iron and other materials over thatch. So there will be mention in that of the different preparations and treatments for corrugated. But the classic color is red oxide. I mean, that is one of the great features of the Irish countryside, is that the red oxide coloured paper.
Yeah.
So red.
You should send me an invoice now, because I want to paint actually now in the next week, so it's going back to red again. I said I'd check. Yeah.
Good man.
Yeah. So just I think, Tom, you have it. That's it. And we'll have more questions for you at the end of Tom's presentation, Barry. So with that, Tom, I think you're good to go. We'll let you off there, and we'll switch off.
Thanks very much, Cathal. So I'm just going to show a few slides on mainly agricultural buildings in the landscape. The first slide shows a building that's very well camouflaged with ivy, and just to point out too that has benefits for birds, bees, and bats. So the first few slides, they originally came from Chris Robson, who is a senior architect in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, but they still have a message for today. Like, this is a beautiful farmyard scene with different styles, but Barry mentioned red oxide on the that would be typically galvanized type tin, but with painted with red oxide, whitewashed walls. But what you can see there, the red in the shed in the foreground, that's taken up in the downpipe and window frames in the old stone building. So it all works very well together. Like, this slide shows a new shed that does not fit into the landscape. The walls of the old shed are made from local stone, so they're literally anchored in the landscape. The new shed is angular, kind of cuts into the landscape. It's bright, shiny materials that would be reflective and prominent in the landscape. So, and farmers sometimes get the question, like, does a building need planning permission? They might be saying it's a small building, but in this situation, it definitely would need planning permission, because if it's not a designated area, like a special area of conservation, it would definitely be an area of outstanding national beauty, that the preservation of which would be in the county development plan. So everything would need planning in that situation. The other thing, like, the gable end there is quite large, like that. If that was broken up, say halfway with stone on the bottom and just cladding or maybe timber, even better, on the top, it would break up the building and soften its appearance. Examples just of poor design. On the left is a yard on the side of a hill. my day-to-day job would be helping farmers and advisors trying to plan new developments in yards. And if we're talking about a farmyard like that, and you're trying to extend it, like it's very costly, you might have to build up ground and all of that. So nowadays we try and avoid putting buildings on the side of a hill, because it will cost farmers money, and apart from not appearing very well in the landscape. On the right, it's a very complex farmyard with multiple types of sheds, from A-shaped sheds here in the foreground, to round roof sheds, to a single pitch kind of lean-to here. So it's quite, there's no kind of beauty about the overall farmyard in that situation. This is an open-ended shed that visually is a bit raw. Like, it's the probably more, Barry mentioned utility. That it's cost effective to feed with an open end or an open side on the building, but we're kind of compromising a bit on beauty. It mightn't matter so much if it's within a farmyard, but if people can see it as part of the landscape, it wouldn't look terribly nice. This is an aerial view. A colleague of mine has this on a virtual farm tour. So it's an aerial view of a farmyard. What I like about this, the old dwelling house, but some of the old buildings in the courtyard that's around a lot of dwelling houses in the past, that they have largely been retained. You can see a kind of a round entrance there where maybe a horse-drawn carriage was backed into it. So it's nice to see the old buildings being retained while the farmyard is developed in a different direction. This photograph is an aerial photograph from a farmyard in County Donegal. This farmer, they won a National Milk Quality Award. But what I love about this is the farmyard is so tidy. And then also, there's a nice level of planting around the farmyard that'll soften the impact of the buildings. And trees adjacent to a farmyard will help to take in some ammonia and reduce the kind of impact of the yard from ammonia contamination. This slide then shows a modern calf house in the foreground, with timber on the sides. The timber would be staggered timbers, so 2 lines of timber staggered, so it would baffle the air movement. But there's a lot to be said for trying to use more timber, like in terms of its local material, and it's kind of visually appealing. So the other thing just on that, like the roof of the new building is slightly lighter shade of green than the next oldest building in the background there. But I would expect the colour on the roof would darken a bit in time. But you can see the dark colours work well with the landscape. So that's it really. So on that, so that Colin.
That's super, Tom. Tom, thanks a million for that. It's lovely to see actually a little bit of the old and the new Tom there. And I suppose, Barry, I might get you to turn on your camera as well, and we'll get into a few questions. But just, Tom, looking at your presentation, and this is something I'm sure that you come across a lot, is how we have all these loads of old buildings in the yard, and we're maybe trying to improve our yards to help accommodate maybe our whatever type of farm we're doing at the time. Is it difficult to kind of retrofit or change around those old buildings to make them, useful on a day-to-day kind of a basis, rather than just sitting there as a storage?
It is really, like, I was just out on a yard yesterday. Now, it was an old cow byre, but it's only 8 foot high, like on one side, on the low side. So now the farmer, he's only one tractor now, but I think he was open to maybe buying like a skid steer or low size tractor so that he could go in and clean out. So I wasn't that inclined to go lifting the whole roof and that, because it changed the whole character of the shed. Like so, but there is that, like there might be, we have a housing crisis and that, like so there might be room for some old buildings to be converted for kind of maybe domestic housing use as well. Like, so, there is different avenues, I think, with old buildings. Like,
Yeah, so we currently live in an old grain store. So from the outside, it looks pretty much like the grain store, but I got a lot of hardship in there as a child, wheelbarrowing corn back and forward across that place where we sleep now. But it's funny you should say that, because we have a lot of these buildings, and I suppose lots of farmers have to make that decision on, where do you try, if you go at them and change them around, you take the look off them. So I suppose it's good we have some grants out there available where we can actually restore traditional buildings and leave them as much as they were in the past, I suppose. Barry, just coming to you then, and just a couple of questions coming in, so we'll head over to Catherine then. Um, so you mentioned there's a lot of specialist work in what you were talking about. You mentioned gates, you mentioned buildings, you've thatch, all that stuff. Do we have people around, or builders? Where do we get the resources? Where do we find those people to help us out if we need to do a bit of work to try and rejuvenate those projects?
There's a big move on at the moment to increase the number of people who can do masonry work, mud building work, forge work, you name it. There's a lot of activity. So there are people who are setting up courses around the country. Not everybody attending those courses is going to become necessarily a full-time practitioner, but some of them are taster courses for people to just see, is this something that they might like to do down the line? I'd love to see transition year kids, dipping their toe in the water with all sorts of conservation skills. It's really satisfying for people. Everybody doesn't have to go to college and get degrees and sit behind computers. We need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need stone wallers, we need all of these people. There's a huge skills shortage. And as I say, courses around the country have been set up. There's thatchers being trained at the moment, for example, in Kilkenny, and to some degree also in Donegal. So it is a very live sort of area. There probably aren't enough of those at the moment, but everybody's working to improve that situation. And also, traditionally, farmers did a lot of, and still do, a lot of really practical work. I mean, lots of people can fix up stone walls, turn their hands to a bit of carpentry and so on. Farmers are some of the most practical people. If I was on a ship going down and there was an architect on board or a farmer, and only one of them could go in the boat, I take a farmer any day.
Barry will definitely keep you. That's for sure. You're saying all the right things to us.
Sorry, anybody who's but I just think the practicalities. Farmers are just deeply practical people, and very, very knacky. So many farmers could thatch their own houses, build their own houses. So it's not just a matter of getting people who have degrees and particular recognized skills. There's a lot of really skilled people out there, undeclared.
Yeah, for sure. Catherine, lots of questions flying in there.
Yeah, lots of questions coming in. Great interest in this topic. Great numbers on this morning. Barry, showing you, and compliments for the presentations. Would you, or is there anybody organising tours to appreciate Irish heritage, which would be of particular interest to international audience?
That's a difficult one to answer. I mean, one of the things I've done myself, just in Tip and in Kilkenny, is walking tours, mostly of towns because they're easier to deal with. Done some mooching around landscapes, but you'd have to really plan them very well, because you'd be on farmland, you'd be in farmyards. You just can't turn up with a group of people.
They're private property, aren't they? Most of the ones you showed.
Yeah. They're all private properties. But that said, I mean, we're all aware of open days on farms, left, right, and centre around the country. I think people are very generous with access if it's organised. So
And
yeah,
perhaps, Tom, a comment, if we're having a farm walk and there's old traditional buildings there, perhaps it's something we can at least, compliment or promote that
Yeah.
positive, isn't it? Yeah. Just a couple of specific questions, Barry, you might be able to help with. What's the correct procedure when modifying an old house with an asbestos roof? It was originally thatch.
okay. Some asbestos roofs have thatch still under them. My attitude to asbestos is usually leave well enough alone. Unless the roof is in total rag order, I'd leave it alone. But if you want to remove an asbestos roof off a building, you need specialist people to do that. It's not for the average person or the average local builder. There are specialist firms that deal with asbestos. It's a hazardous material. It's not for anybody who doesn't know precisely what they're about and is licensed. But as I say, if it's there, it's not doing any harm, I'd say just leave it. Asbestos, which is inside buildings, is a different story because you're probably breathing in particles and so on. But if it's on a roof, it's exposed to the atmosphere, there will be some dust coming off it, but it won't be. I'm not sure that it'd be madly hazardous. But I'd just be really careful.
Yeah. Yeah. Barry, have you been able to access the Land Commission archives and what they can tell us about how they created farming settlement clusters through closely co-located farmsteads that shared resources?
I thought they were rather doing the opposite. Like the Land Commission and their equivalents in Sweden, for example, and in Britain and other countries were into breaking up the little farm settlements and, if you like, privatizing everything. Like you had until a certain point, you had very much a communal approach to the landscape, to farming. People cooperated. People still do cooperate, but they cooperated in a very intense way. They were living cheek by jowl. If you take farm settlements in, for example, South Kilkenny, it's close to me. There's a lot of them still there. The houses and yards are really juxtaposed one next to the other. There's a great deal of cooperation is needed to keep everybody happy in such a location. That the portions of land will be scattered around the place. You sort of sometimes might have to pass pretty much over somebody else's land to get to your own land. This sort of thing. This was very common. But the attitude of the Land Commission and indeed landlords was to break up that particular land settlement pattern and, if you like, rationalize it and make it more economically viable. So you went from very higgledy-piggledy small fields, and even those long, narrow fields that I showed, into squarer, larger fields that were easier to manage from the point of view, particularly of machinery and so on. So, but the Land Commission archives, I haven't looked at them, no. And I'm sure there's a lot of really, really interesting and important information in it, photographs and so on.
Tom, maybe to come to you first on a couple of planning ones there. Should there be a minimum separation, 100 metres question mark, between old farmhouses and modern industrial sheds?
I suppose I would distinguish between, good farm buildings and maybe sometimes we'd have kind of like very big, kind of like aircraft hangar type buildings really that have no kind of shape, in terms of, so like, but if it's the normal type of farm building, like, we'd have a distance between the old and the new in terms of servicing the new farm buildings. We like to do buildings in a street effect as well because, like, you have to have access to the gable, by and large, the gable end of buildings. So, like, so there's a lot that comes into that, like, so so they're right in a sense that you can't build on top of an old courtyard right up against it in most situations. So I think an element of common sense and teasing out what needs to be done like would go a long way really.
Yeah, and so good planning and good design, and I think that comes into this question, Tom, and it may have come in before you did. I think you've covered this, but I'll just let you go back on it. It's large slatted sheds in a out of character in a vernacular landscape. Is there any way the planning regulations take into account the vernacular landscape? to such developments, and the question that a lot of restrictions around housing, but doesn't seem to be the same restrictions for these sheds.
No, I think there is the planning process is very rigorous, like, and there's it's set down in law and that. So like there is demands in terms of slat housing, and the vast majority of farm buildings now come in under the planning regulations. So it's no, I think people are taking that seriously by and large, really.
Yeah.
So.
Back to Barry there, and then I'll come back to you, Cathal, in case I'm missing any key ones there. A good few questions about grants for different things. Barry, for buildings, different, grants in the heritage sphere. Can you comment?
Yeah, there's a multiplicity of grants. It sometimes makes my head spin, I have to say. But there's the Built Heritage Investment Scheme. There is the the Built Heritage Investment Scheme. The deadline for submissions to that, I think, is the end of the month. But people should look up buildingsofireland.ie, which is our website, which will have information on it. Otherwise, conservation grants, Ireland will pick it up on Google, on the web. So there's the Built Heritage Investment Scheme. There's the Historic Structures Fund. There's a special fund targeted at vernacular buildings, whether they're listed or not. There's traditional farm buildings grants, which is run through the Heritage Council, and there may be others run through local authorities. So there's quite a few of them. A key person to talk to is the architectural conservation officer, if there is one in your local authority, or the heritage officer in your local authority. These will be a really good first port of call for anybody interested in the whole grants area.
Barry, so there is a lot of these buildings around the country. Is there anywhere we can go on a website to look and see where they are, or if people have buildings or something of significance, maybe lime kiln or something like that? Is there anywhere we can, report it and have it put up somewhere so we can have a track of all these?
Yeah, it's actually quite a task to track them all. Our own website, as I say, buildingsofireland.ie, has quite a few examples of rural heritage, whether it's lime kilns, vernacular houses, all sorts of buildings that, big houses and so on, farmyards, the works. It's not exhaustive. It was never meant to be exhaustive. But I know, for example, we did a survey of thatched buildings and corrugated over thatch houses. So all thatched buildings in the Republic, plus all, or an attempt to retrieve all the corrugated over thatch houses or corrugated roofed houses. And, we have a haul of about 5,000-6,000 of all of those. But I know from recent work I've done in North Kerry, there are hundreds of houses with corrugated roofs probably over thatch. There's an awful lot out there of interest. The question is time, resources to actually record all that. Part of the issue is, why are you recording? What are you hoping to do? I would prefer a situation where we didn't have to go around listing everything. I would prefer a situation where everybody just assumes that anything which is old really needs to be cared for. And that's everything from, a mid-20th century bungalow, the typical sort of window bungalow with a hipped roof, which are lying idle all over the place. Labourers' cottages, which are a particular bugbear of mine, because they're just being abandoned whole scale around the country, or being, quite severely altered. And then farm buildings just generally. I think if there's just a general interest in retaining and looking after all of this, for me, that's a much better way than just putting listing orders and everything, because we're not going to be able to do that. And why? Appreciation on the part of everybody is really the only way of protecting all of this stuff. But there's huge interest locally in any given area, in their local heritage, their rural heritage, their farm heritage. It's a growing thing. I'm glad to see. It's
so
fantastic.
Cathal, given that he's covered everything there, but there's a couple of questions in there about ice houses and sweat houses. So obviously they're of particular, well, they're of interest. All is of interest. Any
Yeah.
particular comment on those two,
Yeah.
Barry?
Ice houses are mainly associated with large landed estates. I passed by one just on Sunday. It's a place where I regularly go for recreation, and it's associated with a multi-period big house, a landlord's dwelling. They are associated with landlord's dwellings. There's a number of them. They don't survive. There's not huge numbers of them, but when we come across them, we do tend to add them to the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. Sweat houses, likewise, they tend to fall into the Archaeological Survey uh, to a large degree. Their dating is probably, they could be 17th, could be 18th, some of them might be 19th century. Ice houses tend to be 18th and 19th century in date. So yeah, they're all of interest.
Yeah. A question there I can probably answer, but maybe you can add to it. Is there an organisation to protect and maintain stone walls? There is a Dry Stone Wall Association of Ireland. So can you add anything to that?
Yeah, not really, except
Yeah.
to say that stone walls and in general, mortared walls and dry stone walls will be covered by our handbook. And there's a growing interest in repairing all sorts of walls. There's also the Stone Walls Festival on Inisheer. It's on, I think it's around about now. It's this time of the year to have that. So everybody can muck in, try a bit of dry stone wall building, for example, or a bit of mortared walling. There is skill in it, and people learn that pretty quickly, that these things just don't build themselves. It requires a really good eye, really good hand, and but it's immensely satisfying. So that's just something else to consider there.
Tom, there's a kind of a specific question around the reps, the old buildings grant that we get. Um, is that covered, or is there a restriction if the building can't be seen from the road? You know, or
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
yeah.
but it's a pity, really. But that's
Yeah, it's probably unfortunate that we have these fabulous buildings, and just because you can't see it from the road, they're not covered. And a good few of the comments have come through that I think people looking at the questions here, and Catherine, you can agree maybe that people are very interested and quite proud actually of their buildings, but they're quite expensive to bring back to life a bit. And I know even the ones at home here that we did, you have kind of heads and sills that are holding up the old stone there, and there would have been made of big pieces of wood that are starting to rot away. And if you don't keep on top of them, they'll just fall down. So it's maybe something, I suppose. I know we have policymakers on this webinar, maybe something, Tom, they could consider, is it?
I think so. Like because like it does take a good level of investment to keep these buildings, like, and it's not something, like, as people have alluded to there, that you can cash in on, like if it's within an old farmyard, like it's you can't obviously sell the building, do you know what I mean? So it's in the national interest, so I think some help in that regard would be very useful.
Yeah, just a comment, I suppose, Cathal, on the traditional farm buildings. I work closely with Anna Meehan to promote that, and it's very much a case of, it depends what they get in as to, they're trying to spend the money as wisely as possible. So I would always encourage everybody to apply, so it there's a huge variation then as to what's accepted or what's and they're trying to go for smaller ones in recent years, smaller bits to keep the buildings alive. But the other thing I would like, I've always found that when we started talking about this, even it was part of reps and then it went into the traditional farm buildings grant, was the fact that somebody's getting money for them is really an indication that they're valuable. So that kind of boosts us promoting them, whether or not somebody goes and gets a grant or does something. I think our big role is just to, like what Barry said, is to think before something is replaced, if it's not a common new thing today.
And one last question for Barry, because we're nearly out of time. And I thought it was really interesting. We were talking about heritage, and we're getting really tied down on buildings and solid stuff. But you mentioned the Sacred Heart in houses. And when you said that, the first thing I thought about was down in Wexford anyway, the John F. Kennedy picture beside it would have been in every single house nearly in the place. Do we focus sometimes too much on the built and we forget about the actual the living that people did.
Yeah, yeah. For me, actually, the most interesting thing about traditional houses is just what you're talking about. It's what would be called the oh gosh, what do they call it? The intangible,
Yeah.
the intangible parts of it, the living that went on, the whole religious tradition, and indeed supernatural tradition. The numbers of stories that there are based around the heart flag, stories of the devil, stories of the fairies, really related to the heart. That just reminds me to really emphasize the importance of retaining the old kitchen heart. You take the old kitchen heart out of the house, you might as well just take a ball and, a bulldozer to it. The old heart, the old kitchen, is literally the HEART of a vernacular building. It is the number one thing on my list to protect of all of vernacular is vernacular interiors, the interiors of vernacular houses and their hearts, just because they are the accumulation of a family's lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way to finish, and an important point to make as well, because look, in the end of the day, it's all about memories and what we think. So, Catherine, I think there's probably another webinar and stories around the heart that we might think about, but
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think that's the cultural heritage, the
yeah,
third leg of the stool that we possibly don't cover as much either, Cathal. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Now, unfortunately, we've run out of time this morning, but look, a massive thanks for everybody for submitting questions. I think it really adds to some really interesting questions again, as always, this morning. Barry, big massive thank you to you. You're in the Department of Heritage. Like, it's really important the work you're doing, and it's great that you can bring this kind of information back to us. And that was evident in the comments that yourself and Tom have got in your presentations. Tom, massive thanks to you as well. Really important. It's lovely to see the mix between the old and the new, and that you're really concentrating and trying to, marry them together, so that everything, it's not just all about putting buildings everywhere. It's about trying to marry it together. So thanks a million for that. And Catherine, massive thanks to you as always. Really useful, and always getting a great discussion going. And Yvonne in the background, Yvonne Marr, big thanks to you for helping to run the webinar. Everything always runs as smooth when Yvonne is around. And next week, we can look forward to chatting to Maeve Bulger, from Biodiversity Officer with the Heritage Council, and Dr. Catherine Keena again is back with us to discuss the launch of Hedgerow Week. It's back again. It's a great initiative and great to see it back again already. And we're going to discuss a strategy for hedge management on farms. And that's not to be missed. It's long before.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.